Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
This is Pint Glass Football. Drink beer, talk NFL and college football. I'm your host, Brad Fowler, and McKinsey Brewing is the official beer of Pint Glass Football. Follow them at McKinsey Brewing. Follow us at pintglassfootball.com. If you're new to the show, hit that subscribe button. What's up, PGF Nation? The NFL draft is another week closer. OBJ gets traded to the Ravens. A former number 3 overall pick also got traded. How is that going to affect this upcoming draft? We'll talk about it. And today we're going to rank each of our top 3 prospects at the running back, edge, and cornerback positions. Joining me again to do so, my new co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, PGF Nation? I'm happy to be back. I'm excited. Me and Brad have, like I say, and I'll say it again, this has been a long time coming for us to put a lot of our casual talks into this format, and I'm happy that we've been able to get together and then bring this to you in this format.
Yeah, man, we're just getting started, and you're right. It has been fun. It's already been a lot of fun, and I know it's going to be a lot more fun breaking it down for you guys. A lot to get to. Before we start, though, I just want to give a quick shout out to the guys at ESPN Radio, ESPN 700, 92.1 FM in Utah. Today, those guys had me on their show as a guest on the air. Was really, really cool. Talking NFL news and some NFL draft stuff with those guys. If you guys want to listen, there's a link on Twitter at PGF Podcast, or you can go to ESPN 700's website and you can find the link there as well. Definitely a cool experience. But Alex, we've got a lot to jump into. Like I said in the intro here, a little bit of news I want to get to first. OBJ signs with the Baltimore Ravens. This was something that we talked about last week on the show. It comes to fruition. What are your initial thoughts on this move?
Finally, we're going to get rid of the narrative that Lamar does not have any receivers. Was the first thing that popped into my head because, as you know, there's just been this ongoing narrative about he needs receivers, he needs receivers, he needs receivers. The other thing is not only did they bring in Odell Beckham Jr., they also signed Nelson Aguilar. I think within 7 days of each other, those two things happened. So now you have Odell, Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar, Devin Duvernay. And there's a couple other guys, but those are the top 4 on the depth chart as of right now. We know who knows what they do in the draft. But finally, it looks like this is a decent crop, pending health, of course. Decent crop of receivers, and finally we can get to see what everybody believes they've been saying about Lamar, that he simply needs receivers, and that was my number one thought when that happened.
Yeah, this is a big story. I mean, Odell Beckham Jr. is a big name. Obviously, this is a big story to see him get signed by the Baltimore Ravens here, a 1-year deal worth up to $18 million. Pretty big price tag. I was a little surprised that they opened the wallet that much for a guy like this, a guy that's 30 years old, coming off an injury. He's had some injury history in the past. I think it's safe to say he's probably past his peak, but I think it shows that the Baltimore Ravens are trying to make a commitment to making this team better for Lamar Jackson. The temperature feels like it's really changed suddenly in Baltimore. It was starting to look more and more like the Ravens and Lamar Jackson weren't going to be able to get a deal done. Now multiple reports have come out and saying that Lamar Jackson actually helped recruit OBJ to Baltimore. So if those reports are accurate and true, I think it's a pretty good indicator that the Ravens and Lamar are going to be close to getting a deal done here. I mean, nobody knows for sure what's going to happen long-term and what that's going to look like for Lamar and the Ravens, but to me, it feels incredibly likely at this point that he's going to be back in Baltimore.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we spoke about a little bit to this last week. And I believe that they're going to send the contingency of Ozzie Newsome and probably now OBJ to reach out to Lamar and kind of smooth things over and then open back up talks and finally get a deal done. But I do agree, 1,000% agree with you. This is very, very, very unlike the Baltimore Ravens. They normally do not open up their wallet this big, specifically just for 1 year on a player like this. So this is them, without speaking to Lamar, showing Lamar, hey, man, we really believe in you. We're going to go get one of the top guys in name. We do understand there's an injury history there, but in name, we're going to go get one of these top guys. And it's been a barren market across the board in free agency for wide receivers. So Nelson Aguilar, who does have the propensity to drop the ball. However, we had him in Oakland. He was a baller in us for Oakland. He does get open. If you could clean up the drops, he can be a guy. I won't judge him on anything that happened in whatever New England was doing last year. I won't judge him on that. But in Philly, in Oakland, he's been able to get open. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here, and hopefully he can be an added value as well. And these are also guys, Rashad Bateman aside, but Devin Duvernay, Odell Beckham Jr., and Nelson Aguilar, these are three guys that are interchangeable that you can put at the X, Y, or Z. So that gives them multiple sets that they can always, and multiple looks that they'll be always able to use when they line up.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's going to be really interesting to see how they integrate this into the offense. And as of right now, as we know, Lamar hasn't signed yet. So we're just kind of banking on this pushing that and making it so that Lamar Jackson is going to want to sign. I think it'll happen. I think it's a good sign if you're a Baltimore fan, if you're a Lamar Jackson fan, wanting him to stay in Baltimore. I think it's more than likely they will get the deal done, like I mentioned, because of a move like this. The Lions have traded the number 3 overall pick from the 2020 NFL draft, Jeff Okudah, to the Atlanta Falcons. The reports are saying that the Lions are going to receive a 5th-round pick in this upcoming 2023 NFL draft. What are your thoughts on this move?
If anybody had a chance to listen to us last week, season 5, episode 1, when we kind of went through the top 10, and Atlanta having one of those top 10 picks, I mocked Devin Witherspoon to them. So I immediately think this may change that. I should have looked up Jeff Okudah's contract. I think he only has 1 year left. I think this is his 5th year option. So this is really a prove-it year. So I don't think it necessarily stops them from drafting Devin Witherspoon the way I have it mocked, but it does make it interesting on what they would draft here now if they believe in trading for Okudah, believing that maybe this is a 1 year trial for him. It's a contract year, and maybe he's going to ball out because he was injured a lot in Detroit, and he did, there were some missteps along the way, but last year he was a very solid player, not the elite shutdown corner that they thought they were getting from that Ohio State stable of DBs that have come out, but they thought they were going to get that. He started to show that last year, so this is his opportunity to show it. But I will say I'm not sold that they still won't go out and get Witherspoon, but I think in terms of what I mocked last week, I think this does give them the ability to go and get a pass rusher, a legit edge pass rusher, if they so choose to move away from the cornerback option.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And from the Lions side of things, I think they traded away Okudah for a couple reasons. The first of which was a numbers game. The second, and you kind of touched on it, he just hasn't played up to where he was drafted, and he's dealt with those injuries. Now, last season was probably his best season as a pro, but you're right. He's kind of in that put up or shut up point in his career, and the Lions clearly felt like they have added enough on the defensive back end that they can move on from a guy like Jeff Okudah. Cameron Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, these guys all were brought in to help solidify that secondary that really struggled at times. How does Jeff Okudah's trade impact the Lions' draft options?
I think this now puts them in position, should they want to draft one of the top 2 corners, and do that as well. However, I still think they want to improve that pass rush. They did go out and spend some money in the defensive backfield by getting C.J. Gardner. I think that this could give them an opportunity to go after, if he falls, perhaps to get interior help with Jalen Carter. And now you get to team him with Hutchinson, Houston, and Jalen Carter. And now you have a formidable pass rush to go after quarterbacks that would help improve that defense immensely. And if you have a pass rush, that always helps out the back end as well. This is not a bad move for them. I think this really puts them in position to do a couple of different things that we may have not thought of during the mock draft, that now puts them in position to do.
I think it definitely opens the door more for them to potentially take one of these top cornerbacks at that number 6 pick. They also have the number 18 overall pick. So that's another place where maybe, as deep as this cornerback class is, and we're going to talk cornerbacks here in a minute when we break down our rankings, this is a deep class at that position. And so maybe they're thinking at 18 they can still get a corner. maybe at 6, they go after one of these elite pass rushers. It'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out, but I think it 100% impacts the direction that they're going to go regardless. Speaking of direction, we're going to go here. Before we jump in to our player rankings here, we've got 3 different position groups, like I said in the intro, that we're going to get to today. But the Twitter poll question of the week, Anthony Richardson, a guy that's a very polarizing prospect, a guy that we ranked in last week's episode. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to our thoughts on Anthony Richardson. So I asked you guys, boom or bust when it comes to this player. 51% of you on Twitter are saying boom. 49% are saying bust. This poll question is still up on Twitter at PGF Podcast. If you want to put a vote in there, man, this is really split down the middle. What are your thoughts on the reaction to this question?
Well, again, I will reference episode 1, where I specifically used the term boom or bust pick. Either he's going to be really, really good to great, or it's just going to be a bust. I just, again, having as a Florida Gator fan, having watched him, there's a lot of upside, huge amount of intangibles, huge amount of raw talent. However, when it comes to the X's and O's, which really means you're taking that talent and applying it, he leaves a lot to be desired. So when we're looking at the tape doesn't tell us this guy is a day one starter the way we talked about CJ Stroud and as well as Bryce Young. And of course, we can always be wrong, but however, we're only looking at what the tape tells us, and the tape tells me this is a boom or bust player that has huge amount of upside on lower ceiling. So I will say if this is a Vegas bet, I'm going to go with the under. Fortunately, he's going to be a bust. But what I will say, just as a caveat, the more he falls, the better it will be for him, because that means he will be going to a more structured organization that probably has solid coaching that can help groom him, where he has a better chance to not be a bust. I'll say that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm leaning heavily towards bust as well. And by no means am I rooting against this guy. I'm not rooting against any of these players. We're just projecting what we think will happen here. I hope he turns out to be a great quarterback in this league. I hope he develops into one. But the key word is develops, because like you've touched on and like I've touched on here, he has a lot of growth left if he's going to reach NFL starter status or high-level NFL starter status. I think he's just not there yet. He's not ready. The lack of experience. He has too many things that he needs to work on before he's going to be ready to play at that level. There's one team in the top 10 picks here that I think really makes a lot of sense that I started thinking about more and more after the episode aired last week, where I think it could be potentially a really good fit for him, and he might just be available as well. And that's number 5, the Seattle Seahawks. When I look at the fit there, if Seattle stays put at 5 and he happens to fall that far, you've got a guy like Geno Smith, a veteran quarterback in place that they just signed to a new contract. You've got a veteran coach in Pete Carroll who's had a lot of success with mobile quarterbacks, and I think it would be a great spot for him to be able to sit behind Geno for a year or two, learn how to play the NFL quarterback position, can kind of develop slowly and bring him along. I don't think Pete Carroll is going to feel any pressure to start him early, especially with Geno being in place there. They've got a good young running back. They've got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. He's got some weapons to throw to when it comes his time to play. And they just hit on 2 offensive tackles in the draft last April. So the offensive line starting to come together as well. I think that could be a really interesting landing spot for a guy like Richardson.
And the wild card in this whole thing is, remember Arizona at the number 3 slot. That pick is up for trade. So it'll be interesting. And I heard today there's like a few teams that are looking, at least 5 teams I think I heard were looking to trade up. Now, whether that's for Richardson or not, that remains to be seen. But I think Arizona can play a part in what happens in terms of your scenario, because people will be trying to move up. And I think that's going to really start to, because usually we have a point when we say, hey, the draft begins at pick 2, pick 3. Usually we have a really, really, truly good feel at who's going to be number 1. But at this point, we really don't. This is probably one of the more obscure drafts that we've had, where we don't kind of know where everybody's going to fall. It's kind of really up in the air. We're not sure on anything. So this is going to be actually a very interesting draft now that I think about it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. I just get more excited every day talking about it, breaking it down. Can't wait for late April here. But let's jump into these player rankings here, Alex. I want to start with the running back position. This is a really deep group this year. Who do you got as your number one running back? Kind of feels like a slam dunk pick. I probably know who you're going to say. We probably have the same guy. I think everyone knows where we're going here, but I want to hear who you've got number one.
Sure. From Texas, Mr. Bijan Robinson. I mean, if you have not watched Bijan Robinson, I don't know how to even just really describe him to you in a sense, but I will say this. Runs with a low center of gravity, but plays big boy football, if that makes sense. So he's, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he's about 6 feet, 220-ish pounds, but runs with a lot of power, runs with a lot of speed, always in the right position. I saw him miss a few holes because that's one of the things I look at. Is like, okay, what is your decision making when the hole is open? Because in the NFL, those holes close a lot faster than they do in the in college. However, but I did always see him choosing the right hole and running through the hole with determination, not skipping. I call it skipping through the hole with, you don't know if you picked. No, he once he puts his foot in the dirt, he's going forward. And whether it's a 3-yard gain or a 30-yard gain, he's going to fall forward. I think we all know that he's the clear consensus number one. Everybody's big boy without a doubt. The only thing I will say is I'm interested to see, because this rarely happens in college with a lot of the primary running backs, if he can catch the ball out of the backfield. I saw a few things. I saw a trace here, a trace there, but obviously in college they usually don't use the running backs like that. And the last thing I'll say about it is, he does look like, and I think this is one of the biggest things when it comes to a running back. On third down, can you pass block? Can you protect the blitz? Do you know what you're doing? And he appears to be that. Obviously, in the NFL, it gets a little bit more schemed in such a way that there's disguises and you need to know where you're going, the stunts and so on and so forth. But he does appear to have the wherewithal on what to do. He's not Ezekiel Elliott. Ezekiel Elliott was a monster in blocking coming out of college. He's not that. But he does have the ability that he'll take on block willing. He's a willing blocker in the blitz and so on and so forth. So I do like that. And I think that's very important when you have a rookie running back coming on your team.
Yeah, I've got the numbers here written down: 5'11", 215, 4.46 40-yard dash. That's pretty ideal. When you're looking for a prototypical premier running back, those are the kind of numbers that you want to see. A guy that can run inside or outside, ideal blend of size, speed, agility, just checks a lot of boxes. Obviously, my number one running back as well. The one thing that really stood out to me is he has elite balance. It is hard to get this guy on the ground. Great footwork, knows how to keep his balance, keep his feet moving. I think he's a 3-down back. You touched on it. Being able to catch out of the backfield, being able to pass protect, maybe not at an elite level, but I think at a high level. And I think those will translate at the next level. Now, some of the knocks I had on his game, he doesn't always run with that power that you'd like to see, especially for a bigger back. He doesn't always finish runs as often as you'd like, falling for those extra yards, finishing off tacklers, so to speak. And I think maybe the biggest red flag for me is some of the injury concerns. Dislocated his elbow, had a neck injury. He had a different upper body injury. He missed a decent amount of time at Texas. So is he built to be a premier back as far as long term? Now, running backs usually have a pretty short shelf life as it is. But if you're going to draft this guy in the first round, you're looking for a guy that you think can be a legit high-end starter, a workhorse back for the next at least 4 or 5 years, I would think. Where in this draft would you feel good about taking Robinson?
We know that Philadelphia at 10, there's been, obviously they've moved on from Miles Sanders. So there's been a lot of talk of him there because they do have the 2 picks. But I don't think you can do that so high in the draft. I think you're going to have to go in a different direction. The one place that I can see him going immediately, 2 places. This is Detroit at 18, and I cannot see him getting past the Los Angeles Chargers at 21, specifically being that Austin Eckler, they're in this tug of war with Austin Eckler, because now if you draft Bijan Robinson, I believe that puts you in a position to either keep Eckler for the year or that puts you in a position to trade him. And he's a running back that you can trade for a 2nd or 3rd round pick with the production that he's given. So I think he can go as high as 18 if we're just leaving the draft as is. He can go as high as 18, but I don't think he gets past 21 with the Chargers. I just can't see that happening.
All right, let's shift to number 2. This is where it gets a little more interesting. Who's your number 2 running back in this class?
Jack Charbonnet from UCLA. 6 feet, 214 pounds. Big kid. And I'm doing that on purpose. I'm just because there's such a drop off from Bijan to Zach. I do like him. I liked his production. I actually liked more of his receiving out of the backfield and ability to do that. Now he's also coached by Chip Kelly, which does have an NFL pedigree and so on. So he does have that going for him. So how that offense may have looked at times in utilizing the running back in the running game as well as the receiving game as well. So I did like that. Because it's the Pac-10 and it may not have been I know a lot of people, we're huge SEC guys for the most part, and I'll let you speak to that more because I know you see a lot more of those games. But I did like what I saw from him. I mean, he had limited touches, but every time he touched the ball, he was those chains were moving forward, or he was moving forward no matter what. And I think that's a big thing. If I'm not, I did not pull up his stats, but I do remember when I was researching this, he had under 200 carries, but he had about 1,500 yards rushing at about maybe 7 to 8 yards a clip. That's a lot of production for under 200 yards, specifically at his size. So I do want to give him a lot of credit for that in terms of what he's doing. So I do like those intangibles, and I do like what he did on tape. Looking at the 40-yard dash, 4.53, the split 1.54, 37-inch vertical and 10.2 broad jump, bench press 18. And again, as I mentioned, he's 6 feet, 215. Great guy. I like the attitude. I like the character. I think this is a guy that if he's not a day one starter, he would definitely be a great 1-2 punch with another running back. If let's just say if you have a third down back, a quote unquote scat back, if you team him with Zach, I think you'll have a formidable running game.
Boy, we're thinking on the same wavelength here because I thought going into this, I might be a little high on Zach Charbonnet, but apparently not. I've got him in number 2 as well, Alex. I really like this kid's game. I mean, I really like his game. You're right. He's got the size to be a 3-down back, to be a bell cow, so to speak, and he plays like it. Now, 4.53 40-yard dash. He doesn't have that elite speed. He doesn't have that breakaway speed in the open field, but he's a downhill runner, big-time production in his 2 years at UCLA. Big, powerful kid, loves to run guys over. And I love running backs with that type of mentality. But he also showed, and you touched on this, he can run and catch in a variety of different ways out of the backfield. So he's a versatile player. He has great field vision. He can make guys miss in the open field. And I think this is an underrated part of his game. For a guy his size and as physical of a running back he is, he's got a little bit of wiggle in his game, and I really like that. I also like the patience that he shows at times to let his blocks develop. Like I said, the pull-away speed, not elite, but I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be just a consistent, productive runner at the next level. Does run a little bit upright at times, and I think that's going to expose him to some big hits. I don't love that about his running style, but there's so many boxes that this guy checks. And I want to touch on something like you said with UCLA playing in the Pac-12. Look, it's a far cry from the SEC or even the Big Ten, and I totally understand that. There's no way around it. But there was a national breakout party for him, so to speak, LSU game 2 years ago, a big nationally televised game at UCLA. LSU, a team, obviously an SEC powerhouse school with tons of 4- and 5-star recruits, a lot of guys who are going to play on Sunday, and he absolutely pounded them. I mean, just annihilated these guys in the run game and ran over these guys. He ran through guys. He ran by guys. It was so impressive, and it was really eye-opening at that point. He kind of got on my radar after that early non-conference game against the Tigers, and I said, wait a second, I got to start paying more attention to Zach Charbonnet.
One thing I'll say is one running back, he happened to go in the second round a few years ago. He ran a 4.6 Le'Veon Bell. Not saying he's Le'Veon Bell, but we're just talking about what you can do even though that 40 time shows up, because that's just running in tights. But that game speed and what you do and how you use your body and what you can do once that ball is in your hands, even though that speed may not be ideal, but if you run with some power, you're going to get some yards.
Let's shift to number 3. Who's your number 3 running back in this class?
Okay, I struggled here. I truly struggled here. Jamar Gibbs. Alabama is always holding on to some random, and I'm not diminishing him by saying that, but holding on to some random running back that people are not necessarily aware of, or they don't have the gaudy numbers, but they have this guy that's there and he's just sitting there. He's been untapped resource. He's looked good when they've used him, but you don't have the Derrick Henry numbers or any of the type of Sean Alexander numbers that you're accustomed to from getting from those running backs. So I have him as my number 3 running back. Now, it took some digging to find a lot of tape on him because he was kind of in and out. They didn't utilize him as much. Again, he only had 150 rushes. He was under 1,000 yards, never had 1,000 yards at any point in time during his tenure there. However, productive when he got the ball, productive with all his attempts, and also had the most catches out of the 3 people that we've been talking about. So he had 24 his freshman year, 35, then 44. And basically the last 2 years, his last 2 seasons, was catching the ball at 500 yards every single year, basically about 450 to 500 yards. That tells me that this can be a dual threat running back, 5'11", 200 pounds, good, decent size. And, he can do some things when he has the ball in his hands. I did not like what I saw in terms of blocking against the blitz. There was a lot to be desired there, but if you can be coached up, you can do some things there. I have a comp for him, and my comp is simply the guy that we drafted in the Raiders that was also an Alabama running back, who was also the guy behind the guy in Josh Jacobs. Nobody knew who he was really. He wasn't, in terms of when he showed up, he wasn't the bell cow guy, but when he showed up on that screen, everybody knew that was the best running back in the draft, and it showed up. He's not Josh Jacobs in terms of coming out, but I just put him in the same vein of that type of running back at Alabama that was kind of, you had to look for him. You didn't know his name right away, but you had to look for him. So I look at him in the same Josh Jacobs vein.
What's pretty wild, man, is that once again, we didn't tell each other where we had these guys ranked. And it's just crazy how much we see the game the same way here, Alex. At number 3, I have Jahmyr Gibbs, Alabama. And I was surprised by your rankings only because so many draft analysts and writers and people that cover the NFL draft have Gibbs almost a solid across the board as the number 2 running back in this class. Don't get me wrong, I like Gibbs a lot. There's a lot about his game that I can see why people are so high on him, but I bumped him just below Zach Charbonnet for the simple reason that I just don't see him having that ideal build to be a workhorse number 1 running back. I think he could be a really good player at the next level, but I think he's more of a rotational back than he is a guy that you can really lean on for 4 quarters. And the other part of his game, before I get into the good parts here, that you also touched on that I couldn't agree with more, I think he's a real liability in pass protection. Now, he can catch out of the backfield, and he's got great hands, and he's going to be a weapon on 3rd down from that standpoint, but I don't think coaches are going to feel good about him picking up blitzers or defensive ends coming off the edge. As far as his running skills, elite speed, 4.36 40-yard dash. This guy can fly. There's no doubt about it. He's a home run hitter for sure, and he's going to be a threat every time he touches the ball. Quick feet. His agility is an A+. Very versatile running back. I mean, like I said, a guy who's going to be able to run between the tackles, on the edges, and be able to catch out of the backfield. And something else that I like about him is I think he has some real potential to be a high-level kick returner at the next level. I love the burst that I see from him when he finds the lane. I mean, he just pops, hits the lane hard, and can get into the open field in a hurry. A lot to like about Gibbs. I think he's going to be a high-level player in this league. I'm just not sure I see a 3-down workhorse back. And if I'm drafting high or I'm taking a guy early in the first 2 rounds, I'm looking for a guy that I think can be that guy. I don't quite see it with Gibbs, but I think he's going to be a really nice addition to somebody's roster. Hey, PGF Nation, are you tired of the same old bland food at your tailgate parties? Well, let me tell you about my friends at the Tailgate Foodie, the seasoning and barbecue sauce company that specializes in elevating your tailgate and backyard cooking game. With their unique blend of spices and sauces, the Tailgate Foodie will take your taste buds on a flavor journey that you won't forget. Use code PintGlassFoodie for 15% off your first order at thetailgatefoodie.com.
Yeah, I agree. Let me ask you really quick and we can move on. Do you think the media or the atmosphere is saying that about Jameer because it's Alabama versus Zach, who's UCLA? Do you think there's a little bit of bias there?
You know, it's hard to say. I think sometimes guys that come out of the SEC, especially because we have so much respect for this conference, and rightfully so, I think sometimes players across the board, regardless of position, tend to get bumped up the ranks maybe a little bit because we see the logo on the side of the helmet and we say, well, this guy played at Florida, this guy played at LSU, this guy played at Alabama, this guy played at Georgia. And we tend to look at that and say, well, yeah, but look at the numbers. Look what he did in this tough conference. He went up against the best of the best, which is all true. And maybe that does need to be factored into the equation here. But I think sometimes guys can get maybe just a little overrated because of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I asked. I was wondering if we're looking at that, and I'm only looking at the tape. And one of the things I learned from, and you'll learn about me, I talk about tape a lot because I was able to do an internship at NFL Films down in Jersey. And just learning from Cosell and those guys, like, it's really just, you have to shut out everything, any bias you have, and solely focus on the tape and what shows up on the tape is what you have to believe.
So there's a saying when it comes to scouting players in the NFL, and I try to stick to this as well. Scout the player, not the helmet. And I think that's something you touched on here as well, because I think sometimes we do look at the helmet, we look at the logos a little too much at times, and it can be really hard. And I think the best scouts, the best GMs, I think have the ability to kind of remove all that and just look at the player for who he is and what he can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. 1,000%.
All right, let's shift gears here, Alex. Let's jump into these cornerback rankings. Once again, if you guys listened last week, you probably already know who our top two guys are because we talked about them in that mock draft, but we're going to break it down anyway for you. Number one player at cornerback for you, Alex?
Christian Gonzalez, without a doubt. Love the size, love the speed, love the balance, loves how he uses the sideline, which was a staple of one of the elite DBs of that time in Darrelle Revis. He's already doing it. I watched him do it in college, and I think hopefully he can bring it to the NFL. It does become a little bit different when you are dealing with NFL receivers and NFL routing concepts, which are a little bit different in terms of play calling and everything. But I did love every single thing that I saw from this kid. Like, everybody has a weakness, so when I'm going to say what I'm about to say, don't think I don't see weaknesses. But I loved everything about this kid. Like, everything I was like, oh, I could fix that. Or rather, coach, could fix that. Oh, coach, could fix that. Oh, this is that. Because what he does, he's physical at the point of attack, not as physical as probably one of my other guys that I have, but he can be physical at the point of attack. He does protect the sideline very well. He uses the sideline very well. If he gets caught in the slot with any DB, it's going to be a little bit tough. But if you're putting him on the boundary to take away the quote unquote number one, this is a guy that I would draft, and I would have no problem drafting him at 6 if I wanted to go that high. I would have no problem. I would draft him with confidence, understand that I'm going to have a 7 to 10 year starter on my team that's going to be an elite DB within the first 3 years.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. Christian Gonzalez, best cornerback in this class. Everything you said, I agree with. He just checks so many boxes. Awesome blend, size, speed, ball skills, quick feet, big time agility, long, strong, disrupts wide receivers. He's going to win those 50-50 jump balls more often than not. prototypical NFL cornerback on the outside. 41.5-inch vertical, explosive player, 6'1", 197, ran a 4.38 40-yard dash. If you want to talk about a scout just said on paper, like, show me the ideal numbers across the board at a combine when you're looking for an elite corner, this is the guy. I mean, you are literally talking about the prototype. Strong open field tackler, great closing speed. Sometimes, like we said, he's almost, I don't want to call the perfect prospect by any means, because like you said, there's always holes, but there's not a lot of holes that you can find in this guy's game. If I had to kind of pick something out, I'd say sometimes he's a little slow to get his head around, especially on the deep ball. And once in a while, when you watch the tape, you'll see him take a poor angle as far as tackling versus the run. But it's a little, I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of nitpicking here, because nothing I saw when I broke this guy's game down was really alarming. There's no big red flags in this guy's game at all. I think he's going to be a really high-level player the second he enters this league.
Yep, totally agree. Like I said, I'm with you all the way. Like, I could not. Again, you can find holes in it. Hey, you caught him looking in the backfield a little bit. Well, in college you can a little bit, because sometimes everybody's not, NFL level coached so that you can catch them. You can cheat in that way, but we know in the NFL you can't. So those are things that any player is gonna have. There's always, hey, when Randy Moss got there were certain things he had to figure out. Everybody, all the great prospects had to figure out something somewhere along the line. We're just talking about across the board. If I take this guy, can I just not even pencil him in? Can I pen him in as my starting DB for the next 7 to 10 years? And I am absolutely convinced that this is the guy, which is why I mocked him to the Raiders last week.
All right, let's jump to the number 2 cornerback in this class. I think we both know who it is, but let's tell the fans, who do you got number 2?
Out of Illinois, Devin Witherspoon. That is my number 2. I know everybody didn't get a chance to look at him at the combine because he didn't perform. However, combines your shorts, cut the tape on. This guy is, I hate when I use these Hall of Fame comparisons, but Rod Woodson. And what I mean by that is willing tackler, will come up and lay the wood. Sometimes a little bit reckless, which might have led to some of, why he wasn't on the field as much. But he's a willing tackler in the run game, in the pass game. Whoever you tell him to go guard, he will go guard them. He's a Aqib Talib-ish, if that makes sense. Because remember, the Aqib Talib, they moved him around a lot, and even Bill stuck him on tight ends at time. He will guard whoever you tell him to guard without fear. He is a fearless defensive back. The only reason I don't have him at number 1 is because Christian Gonzalez is so fluid. He looks so incredible. He uses that sideline. There's so many other things, a few intangibles that he has that I don't have for Devin Witherspoon. But this guy, if you get him, I think you're looking at a guy, hopefully, again, he can stay on the field, because he does get a little bit reckless with the tackling technique, because he's, like, again, being fearless is a good thing, but it can also be a bad thing at the same time. But this guy will do whatever you ask him to do. I believe he's a coach's dream, and I think in this sport, being a coach's dream makes you a 10-year, 12-year, 15-year starter, and will make you a good to great player in this league no matter what. And so I have Devin Witherspoon at my number 2.
Yeah, once again, we're definitely on the same page here. Devin Witherspoon's my number 2 cornerback as well. I feel like these top 2 guys have kind of separated themselves. And this is a great cornerback class. It's a really deep class, maybe the deepest class we've seen in, 5 or 6 years. A lot of talented guys. There's going to be 5, maybe 6 guys that go in the first round. We definitely don't see that every year in the draft. But this guy is a guy that, like you touched on, probably going to be a 10-year starter in this league, probably going to play in several Pro Bowls and just be a difference maker the day he steps on the field. 6 foot, 180 pounds, great size, excellent foot speed, closing speed, toughness. I mean, he can really close the gap. Elite man-to-man cover corner. I mean, on the outside, this guy really can lock guys up. He also can play zone as well. So I think he's going to be scheme versatile, which adds a lot of value, obviously, when you're drafting, knowing that you can play him in a lot of different ways. And I love your comparison to Rod Woodson. I hadn't thought about that one, And obviously, when you're comparing a rookie to a Hall of Famer, it's almost unfair, obviously. But
Right.
we're
Right.
not saying that he's the next Rod Woodson. We're not saying that he's going to be as good as Rod Woodson. We're just trying to make a comparison to what this guy's ceiling could be. And Rod Woodson, I think, is a terrific comparison. Plays a similar brand of football. Physical, in your face, disruptive, big time hitter. Man, you want to talk about one of my favorite tapes of any of these guys we're breaking down? Boy, is this guy fun to watch. I mean, holy crap. This guy absolutely separates wide receivers from the football. I mean, just takes guys out. He hits so hard for a guy his size. It's crazy. It's like a linebacker playing cornerback. 14 pass breakups in 2022. He's got really good speed, not elite speed for a corner, but good speed. I think he's definitely got the foot speed to play at the next level and be a difference maker. Aggressive, and you touched on this, a really aggressive playmaker and a great tackler. But I also wrote in my notes, sometimes that gets him in trouble. All right, so who's number 3 for you, Alex? Let's round out the cornerback group.
Mr. Joey Porter from Penn State. Another guy that I liked, and I think he was high up, a lot higher initially before we dug into the tape. His name popped, obviously, because of his father, Joey Porter of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and a great player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But now that the dust has settled and we've gotten to look at the tape and we've gotten to look at everybody, I look at Joey Porter the second, give him his own distinction, Joey Porter the second, and I say, I like what I see. He's where he's supposed to be all the time. So that goes to the coaching at Penn State, which I believe that I'll attribute it directly to that coaching there. 4.46 40. Yeah, that means he can still stand up. He can still run with the best. I think he's the biggest corner out of the 3 that we spoke about, if I'm not mistaken. He is another willing tackler, solid player. Obviously, he has the bloodline. He has the pedigree. So there's not going to be anything there. He has the character. This is a guy that's going to be a leader in your backfield. He's not going to shy away from anything. That's going to stand up to anything and do anything that you want him to do. I don't know if I see great. And again, when we're making these comparisons or making these observations and talking about these players, that never means what we say is law. We're just talking about simply what we see on the tape. Anybody can come out. Hell, Tom Brady was a 6th-round pick. That's all I have to say there. But looking at him, I don't see great, but I see solid. I'm going to be a Pro Bowler. I'm going to be a Pro Bowler, and I'm going to make all Pro here and there, and I can be part of a great backfield. You know what I'm saying? So I love what I see from Joey Porter. I would want him on my team if he was there anywhere between 12 and 18, which is where I think he'll go. You're going to get a day 1 starter. You're going to get a guy that's coachable. You're going to get a guy that's going to be a leader in your backfield and a leader on your team. And you're going to get a guy that wants to be great. And that's one of the main things you have. There's a lot of guys that have the talent, but they don't want to be great. This is a guy that has the will. And I will always take wanting to be great over the person that has a skill set that won't do the other things to meet everything they need to meet at the road to become greatness, and what we've seen from the Deions and whoever else you want to name and put in that pedigree. But I will always take the guy with the heart that wants to be great and wants to be coached. I think that is so important and so overlooked when we talk about a lot of players. So I have Joey Porter as my number 3.
Number 3 for me, Joey Porter Jr. I mean, this is crazy, Alex. Once again, because we didn't talk about any of this stuff. And some of the stuff that you can't necessarily measure that you touched on there, some of those intangibles, the work ethic, the guys who want to put in the work, the guys that are coachable, the guys that are going to be locker room leaders, that stuff is really hard to measure, but it's so important. And I couldn't agree with you more. And from all the reports I read, this guy has it. And I think that is big time for any player, regardless of position. When you look at the stuff you can measure, big time height, length combination. You touched on the size. He is the biggest cornerback in this group, 6'2", 193 pounds, 34-inch arms. That is some big time length for a corner. And he uses his size really well. When you watch his tape, he really disrupts wide receivers at the catch point. He uses that length to really make it difficult. Physical press man coverage. He excels in that type of scheme. Little bit tight in the hips, Definitely not a guy who has the agility and the change of direction that you like to see as far as an elite level in that regard. And he does get a little handsy, especially at the top of his routes. But a guy that, like I touched on with the length, he also uses his size and strength to reroute wide receivers, to bump them off their path, to screw up their timing. Does a really good job with that. The NFL pedigree that you touched on, it's not just DNA, because the other part about being the son of an NFL player that I think sometimes gets overlooked is that these guys have an advantage that a lot of other guys don't have, is that they know what to expect. They know what it means to be a pro. They know what it takes at the next level because they've seen it firsthand from their dad. And I think sometimes we overlook how big of an advantage that can be, especially for a young player. We always talk about how the game slows down for guys, usually in year 2 or year 3. Well, a lot of these rookies, when they're sons of NFL players, they're already kind of ready for that, so to speak, because their dads do such a good job of preparing them for the next level. So I think that's something that, once again, doesn't really show up on the measurable side of things, but is going to give him a big advantage year 1 in the NFL. And I think when you look at his size, it should allow him to also possibly match up versus some tight ends at times. I think it's going to give him some versatility. You just don't see cornerbacks with this height and length combination very often. So in certain situations, I think you're going to be able to utilize him in some different ways defensively. Now, I touched on it, below average change of direction. I think that for me is really what separates him from the top 2 guys. And like you touched on, the 4.4, was it 4.43 40?
Yeah.
That's good. It's good. It's definitely adequate speed, not elite speed for a top end corner. And I think those 2 factors kind of drop him down the board just a little bit, but still really high on this kid's game.
Yeah. I love the kid. I think, like I said before, I think he's going to be interchangeable. This is a guy that after 8 years, he'll be able to transition to safety and extend his career. That's what I see in him as well.
That's an absolutely awesome point, by the way. This is where it's going to get interesting, because I thought for sure at this point we would have some differences in where we ranked these top 3 guys at these position groups. Time to get into the edge defenders here, and I'm really interested to see who you've got 1, 2, and 3. Let's start at the top. Who's your number 1 edge player in this draft?
Now, here is where I know for a fact we are going to differ, because at number 1, I have Lucas Van Ness. I love Lucas Van Ness. I love his size. I love every single thing about him, and I love his motor. Give me a guy that's that want to, no matter what. Give me that type of guy who is relentless. Ask any offensive tackle that wants to consistently deal with the guy that's motor nonstop, that's always moving forward at the same speed at the beginning of the game, and that's doing the same thing at the end of the game. This guy's motor is awesome. And when you have a guy like that, once you get him in your organization and you can teach him little tricks of the trade while he learns on the job, you're going to have a guy that looks like Max Crosby. And that's for me, that's my comp. Max Crosby is a guy that is absolutely relentless. A lot of what you saw from Max Crosby before he learned a lot of the actual technique that he's now showing you in his 4th and 5th season, he was doing it for pure effort and motor and the relentlessness to want to get to the quarterback. That's that 1-2 that you've heard me mention several times here. And Lucas is a guy that can do that. And again, I'm using him as a comp as well. I cannot use the comp as Von Miller, which is what I was trying to do, because he doesn't have the speed of Von Miller. But his size and motor and what he can do as a hand in the dirt guy, as well as you can also make him an outside an outside linebacker in a 3-4 as well. Making that guy multiple and interchangeable all the time. And I also believe at times, because of 6'5", 272, you can also, if he gets a little bit stronger, you can move him around that line a la Justin Tuck, if you remember that Giants Super Bowl run. A guy that, even though he didn't have the quintessential defensive tackle size or interior rusher size, you can still put him in there at time just to move him around and get him all access points. I love Lucas Van Ness, and I believe he's going to be the best edge rusher coming out of this draft.
I like it. I like it a lot. And for the first time, we do have different guys at the top. I'll jump into Lucas Van Ness here in a minute, but I'll get to my number one guy. I've got Will Anderson Jr. out of Alabama, really polished pass rusher. And that's something that stands out to me is this guy's a technician. He's got multiple pass rush moves, converts speed to power at a high level. Something that I look for when you're looking at a guy who's going to pass rush and get in the backfield. Can they convert that speed to power? I think he checks that box. Really athletic, good pass rusher, and a great, and I do mean great, run defender. Everyone talks about the pass rush and how vital it is, and that's great, and I think he's a good one. But, man, this guy's elite versus the run. One of the highest quarterback pressure rates in all of college football last season. The sack numbers took a little dip, and I've heard people push back on Will Anderson a little bit because of that. But if you look at the pressure rate, it was still really, really high. Now, he doesn't have the bend and the flexibility of some of the elite pass rushers on the edge. You touched on Von Miller. I remember Von Miller coming out of Texas A&M had that crazy bend. We talked about Joey Porter Jr. and how his dad was a guy who just had so much bend and flexibility coming off of the edge. Will Anderson doesn't quite have that. That might be one of the big knocks on his game. And I think when you look at his skill set, he's not a guy that can really fit any defensive scheme. I think you're going to have to find the right system for him to play in. But if you have a system that he fits into, I think he's going to be a really good player for a long time in this league. He's got long arms, 33-plus inch arms, strong, powerful hands. He does a really nice job of keeping offensive linemen off of his pads. Might be one of the most sure things in this draft. Now, he might not have the ceiling of some of the other elite pass rushers and edge defenders that we've seen in prior classes. Maybe not the ceiling, but he's got a really high floor. Now, at my number 2, I've got Lucas Van Ness, and I also really like this guy's game for a lot of the same reasons that you touched on. Big, powerful player, can play outside, can play inside. Unlike Will Anderson, he's got that versatility. And this is a guy that, like you touched on as well, I thought your comp or your comparison there to Justin Tuck being able to move along that defensive line and still be an impact player, I think that's a really good comp for what Lucas Van Ness could become. Flexible player, especially for his size. He actually shows nice bend. He's got the length, the strength, and the motor are all big, big time check marks for me. Love you touched on the motor and the relentless attitude that he plays with. That cannot be overstated. I love that about his game. And he's a guy that can collapse the pocket with that bull rush. Like I said, big, strong guy, overpowers offensive linemen, pushes the pocket, shows a nice burst off the ball. His inexperience does show up at times, especially with the play recognition. Sometimes he's a little slow to diagnose what's going on. I think that can be improved with playing time and with experience. So that's not a big red flag for me, but it is something that showed up on tape. And I think he needs to develop a little more pass rush counter moves. He really leans on the bull rush, his athleticism and size. But we know at the next level, when you're going against the best of the best, you have to find other moves to go to be able to counter with. I think, once again, not a huge red flag because those are things that can come with coaching as well. The thing I really like about Lucas Van Ness, besides all the things we've said here, is that we have not seen his best football yet. And with his work ethic and motor, I think he's got a really high ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. You feel the same way that I feel about him as well. And one of the things, just as a piece to talk about with Lucas Van Ness as well, what we're talking about when we say we haven't seen his best football yet is because he was a redshirt freshman. So he has only really 2 years of tape, whereas a lot of others have about at least 3 years of tape for the most part. He only has 2 years. So there's a lot of upside here that's unforeseen upside that this kid can really do some things once he puts it all together.
All right. So who's your number 2 guy, Alex?
It's Will Anderson. I was looking at it because I literally have on a sticky note, I have 2 people written next to each other. And as you were talking, I kept looking and trying to find in my little bullet points on each one what I wanted, what I valued over the other. But I cannot deny Will Anderson here. And I think one of the things you spoke to, and you mentioned it before, was where he goes. Now, this is a guy that's going to go in the top 10. And if I pull up that draft, the mock draft, I don't know who the 3-4 fit is here. I am putting him in that box simply because I just believe he can be so much more effective as an outside linebacker. That's not saying I don't recognize people like Robert Mathis, who was a smaller, quick defensive end that had a lot of bend, but he could not, you could not use him against the run. And Indianapolis was a specific type of team during that time when he was teamed up with Dwight Freeney. So I do want to say that. But if I'm looking at the Detroit Lions and they do run a 3-4 defense and they don't want to go with Jalen Carter, I would not mind watching Will Anderson go here, teaming him up with James Houston out of Jackson State, who was a surprise pick, maybe a surprise, not a surprise to the Lions, but a surprise to us in his production. I believe he had 8 sacks last year. Now you take this guy, you put him on the other side. Now you have and I'm just going to date myself. Now you have your Kevin Green and Greg Lloyd on the edges that can really do some damage as pass rushers that'll help out. So I would not mind seeing him there if the Detroit Lions are going to stay, from what I understand, that they're currently in a 3-4. So that, to me, that looks like a really good fit.
Let's jump to number 3. Who's your number 3 edge defender in this class? If it's the same guy I've got, I'm going to be just blown away.
Okay, well, I have Tyree Wilson. Again, I had another. So there's 3 guys that I had connected to each other. But it's Tyree Wilson out of Texas Tech. Love his size and everything that I saw about him. However, the thing that I did not like in what I saw that kind of really gave me a little bit of tightness, the motor. And I see this a lot, and I think we see this a lot with a lot of players that have such this incredible skill set, and a lot of things comes easy to them. Their motor starts to dwindle throughout the game. They'll start out hot and they'll go cold, or they'll start out cold and they'll get hot, which is why I have Lucas so high, because he's redlining it. He's at least trying to redline it all the entire game. And these are some of the things that I don't like that I see from a lot of the edge rushers that have such great talent, great size, and just they can do so. When you watch them, in the moments that you watch them, they are just destroying and wreaking havoc throughout the game. And then there's those games you're watching, you say, wait, this guy plays it. What's going on? And you don't know what's happening. And I'll just use a name and you'll understand why I'm using it. Think Jadeveon Clowney. He's not Jadeveon Clowney, but I'm talking about in terms of what I say, when they just run hot and run cold, run hot and run cold. I really wish he had the motor of Lucas, else he would be my number 1 overall, because this guy's size, and when he decides to play and when he decides to say, I'm going to dominate, he straight dominates no matter what. So that's my number 3 edge rusher.
Somehow I knew it'd be the same guy, and I tried everything in my power to not put Tyree Wilson here. I was looking for every reason. I was looking for every reason to not have him at number 3, but there's just too many physical traits to ignore here. And I think we're really in agreement here on the type of player that we see. Long, tall, crazy long. We talked about the wingspan last week. Just the athletic traits are off the charts. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. This is a guy that keyword should be a versatile defender at the next level because of his size, his skill set, a guy that can set the edge versus the run. The effort is spotty, and that is a big red flag for me. Now, when I watch this tape, he's a nightmare for tight ends. You're not going to be able to block this guy with a tight end. He's just too much to handle. He's going to demand tackles to block him at the next level. But at the same time, there was times watching the tape where bigger offensive tackles, more physical offensive tackles, sometimes overpowered Tyree Wilson. struggle to get off blocks at times. I don't love the instincts. And I think this is something that maybe can be coached up, better play recognition, maybe with experience and maybe with some NFL coaching that can come along. But I don't love his instincts. He finds himself out of position a little too much, needs to work on his hand placement. Just a pretty inconsistent player. And you kind of touched on that with the motor. When he flashes, man, he flashes. But on the plays where he's not getting it done, you're kind of looking at it going, what happened here? Where he disappears. So a lot to like about Tyree Wilson as far as what could be. But he's a little bit of a boom or bust prospect because when you look at the size, the traits, the physical characteristics, the athletic ability, those traits are off the charts. But he hasn't put it all together yet. With the right coaching or the right system, maybe he does, but that's why I had to slide him down this list, even though a lot of draft analysts have him number 1.
Right. Agree. Completely agree. Let me ask you, did you have somebody at 4? Who was your number 4? I'm curious to see if it's the same guy I had.
I struggled keeping him off this list was Miles Murphy from Clemson.
That's the same person. Earlier I referenced, I said I had these 3 players tied together. When I was looking, it was Tyree Wilson, Will Anderson, and Miles Murphy. And I was looking at them between 2, 3, and 4. I'm sorry, 2 and 3 really, because we're doing top 3. And I had those tied together in a line, and I just had bullet points next to each. And I was looking at my whiteboard and saying, what do I value over and why would I knock this person down and stuff like that? But I'm comfortable with what I did and I'm confident what I did. But yeah, it's funny. We both had Miles Murphy at number 4 because I did too.
Of course we did. Man, it's absolutely crazy. And this has been an absolute blast, guys. We're going to wrap it up here. Before we go, I want to give a special thanks to our friends at the Tailgate Foodie for sponsoring today's episode. Check them out, thetailgatefoodie.com. I'm Brad Fowler. He is Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on new episodes. We've got a lot more coverage coming your way. Season 5 is just getting started, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.